Gonna get started here. We got a bunch of people in. So welcome today. This is our episode Pipe Gen Live. It's a new series that we're starting that's really dedicated to just generating pipelines. So whether you're an account executive or leading account executives and you want them to self-generate more pipeline, or you're leading an SDR team, or you're an SDR and you want to land more meetings through your cold emails, cold calls, etc., this is the place to be. So today's going to be all about how to build a killer talk track that your reps will actually use. So here's kind of how this is going to be organized today. One, I'm going to give just kind of a quick state of cold calling. It's something that I've really sort of lived and breathed over the last decade and a half, both in a B2C setting and then most recently in a B2B setting. We're going to talk about what's working, what isn't. We got a great panel today too that we're going to dig into talk tracks and show you examples of talk tracks. And we all kind of think and look about this stuff quite a bit differently, actually. So it's going to be interesting to get that perspective. And then we got a one-on-one that we're going to do with one of our guests. Before we dig in, I want to thank our sponsors. Magical is a tool that I just started using not too long ago, and I think you'll really like Magical. It's getmagical.com. If you find yourself copying and pasting the same messaging to like LinkedIn prospects that you're reaching out to, so connection requests, follow-up messages, if you find yourself copying and pasting the same links over and over and over again and you can't find them, Magical is a really badass tool for that. Mixmax is one of my favorite tools. I use them for sales engagement. Got great email templates, engagement software. They just launched Jack HubSpot integration as well, which I was super excited about.
Yes,
And
sir.
then of course we got Zoom Info. So Zoom Info, all of your data needs in one place, and then a bunch of other stuff that they do as well. And recently came out with Copilot, which I'm really excited about as well. So make sure to check out Zoom Info. All right, we're gonna get to it. So let's just kind of cut straight to the point with cold calling. The visual that I want to give you is why it's so important to be good at cold calling now more so than ever. The average pickup rate to a cold call is about 4 or 5%. So if you kind of think about the math, like how many calls on average you would need to make in order to have a live conversation, it's somewhere around 20 to 30, depending on where you're calling into, etc. The average conversion rate of a connected cold call is 2%. So think about that math for a second. That means you have to speak with around 50 prospects in order to land a meeting. And I don't know about you, that's a lot of work. Some of the best reps that I work with, they book one out of every 3 or 4 live connections into a meeting. So the difference between these two, just to give you a visual example, let me know in the chat who here is an account executive. Give me a yes in the chat. Who here is an AE or leads a team of AEs? Let me know in the chat. Cool. So I gave an AE example here. Something very similar would apply to you SDRs. What you're seeing on the screen here, scenario number one is someone with average phone skills. So let's say that they book 10% of every live cold call into a meeting. If you do the math here, let's say they made an hour of calls every day for 5 days a week, 4 weeks in a month. So they're making 20 hours of calls. So they put 20 hours of effort. And if you look at the conversion rates there on the left, they land about 2 or 3 meetings for 20 hours of effort and source less than one qualified opportunity. Now, if you look at the scenario on the right, same conversion rates, but 30% booking rate of live cold calls. This person books 9 meetings in 20 hours of work and creates 2 to 3 qualified opportunities over the course of a month. So if you don't have elite cold calling skills, my point is the talk tracks and everything that we're going to talk about today, if you are not great at cold calling as an account executive, it's almost not worth doing right now. You got to be great at this skill. So one other thing that I want to share with you, there's 2 other data points that are really interesting as we start to get into talk tracks. One is this data point from Gong showing that over 90,000 cold calls that they processed, they found that the successful cold calls, the rep actually spoke more than the prospect, so 55% of the time versus 42%. And the average length of a cold call is around 80 seconds, according to a big study that Chorus did. And only 10% of cold calls That's wrong. Last longer than 2 minutes. So, with the talk tracks and everything that we're going to talk about today, the reason why you need a really solid talk track or at least a framework around how you approach the call is most of the cold calls die in the first 80 seconds, and you have to do the driving as a rep. You have to drive the conversation. So, what I want to get into next is our panel. I'm going to introduce our guests, and then we're going to dig into talk tracks. So, we got Jack Wauson, SDR manager at Mixmax. Jack, good to have you. We got
Thanks for having
Tim
me.
Miller, director of EMEA sales development at Zoom Info. Tim, good to have you.
Thank
And then we
you.
got Teddy as well. Teddy is a senior SDR at Zoom Info. So we're going to dig into you guys. I think one of the first things that I want to talk about, I'll kick the first question your way, Jack. Um, let's just talk about kind of talk tracks in general. What are your thoughts on talk tracks versus scripts versus maybe winging it, not really having much at all? There's all of these different flavors of how to approach a cold call. What's your take on talk tracks versus scripts, and what do you need versus don't need, etc.?
Yeah, so we were chatting about this, so I'll give context. I come from selling advertising in a previous life before Mixmax, so that was very much script only. You follow the script, you don't deviate from the script. If you have had that experience, you know what I'm talking about, how stressful that can be, also how you don't really have much of a voice. But the positives to a script is you kind of have a track that you're going down in a way. If you like don't know where to go, you have a script that you follow word for word. However, the talk track is more my flow that I really encourage my team as they really start progressing in their SDR, and I manage SDRs, so it's in their SDR journey to where they don't really need that script anymore. They know the product well enough. They know common objections well enough to where now they just have little bits of information that we provide them or they make on their own with their own specific talk track. So it really guides them along and it's not so verbatim that they follow. So for me, I am more talk track positive, but I think as I've been in the manager seat, I think newer reps for on our team really desire and want a script because they're new. They don't really know the product very well. They need to build up their confidence. So that's where the script kind of is nice for them. But overall, talk track is my jam for sure.
So let us know in the chat. Have you ever been in a sales position before? Give us a yes or no, where you had a sales org that was like really picky about using the script. Like you have to use it word for word. If you deviate from it, then you're
Manager over
not
your
going to get.
shoulder, listening.
Yeah.
Oof,
Yeah, let me know. Have you ever been in a position where you've had to use a script word for word? Yeah, Grace is not sales, but a call center. I happen to come from the call center world as well. A lot more no's than I thought. So good for you guys that
yeah,
have never.
I guess orgs are getting away from it. That's good. That's good to see.
Um, so let's talk about kind of the different flavors here. I'll kick this question your way, Tim. What do you feel like is the difference between, let's say, a framework versus a talk track versus a script? I think it might be good for us to kind of get on the same page with the lingo associated with this before we dig into some of these examples.
Yeah, for sure. When I think about a script, I think about, if you were, let's say, in a play in your high school theater class, right? You have a script, you have lines that you have to follow because that's, how the show um, will continue to progress onward. But I think with cold calling, what you'll quickly realize is that you may have an idea of how this call may go, or if you ask this question, it might go one way or the other way. But there's also a million other ways that you can go. So, in my opinion, I think I agree with Jack in the sense where when you're new, cold calling is something that you haven't done before. A script can be very helpful. But I also think at some point it can be your enemy because when, the response isn't that the prospect gives you isn't laid out on the script, now you're kind of like fumbling and you're just reading off words, not really actually thinking about what you're saying. And now you're kind of have your hands tied behind your back and maybe you start getting desperate or feature dumping or talking over your prospect. So that's why like in my opinion, um, a framework is what allows you to be successful on your cold calls. And, what a framework looks like is, a strategy or an approach that you take that's going to naturally progress this conversation along. So one thing that I've always done coaching SDRs is teach the mindset that, like, hey, the first 30 seconds of the call buys you the next minute. And then the next minute during that conversation buys you the next minute, and then buys you the opportunity to ask somebody for the meeting. So an example of a framework, Jason, that, I would potentially coach an SDR is, you open the call, you introduce yourself, and then you propose a question with two scenarios. So, you might say, hey, most sales leaders I'm speaking with are struggling with, these two main things. So you present two pain points, let the person who you're speaking with decide, which one's more of a pain point for them. And then you let that conversation flow down that way. And you're in a position to provide value and, solve the pain points or the challenges that business may be facing. So what I think of, when you break down a cold call, I think it's an opener, it's a conversation, and that opener opens the conversation. And then the conversation is ultimately what allows you to close the meeting, because you'll have some type of, pain points or value that you've provided to this prospect, for their time to be worth meeting with you.
So really it's what, intro and your opener, and you're gonna do some scenarios. I'm a very big fan of that approach, right? If you really understand your persona in your opener, just getting straight to the point and talking about what you hear a lot of their peers focused on. So you have that opener. Is the next part of the framework then finding pain? Just really digging into the problem?
Exactly. So it would be, asking open-ended questions. And I think this is one thing that, SDRs struggle with, especially when they're first starting out, is they're more focused on what they're going to say, as opposed to being more focused on the questions that they're asking, which are going to allow them to build value within the call. And I think, with what most SDRs or most people who are making cold calls, a lot of times there's a lot of different scenarios, right? Like, there might be a new hire, and that's kind of like the trigger of why you're reaching out, because they just hired a new VP of sales. Or maybe, somebody from one of your customer accounts just moved to a new company and you want to get your foot in the door. Or maybe the company got funding, or maybe they've had a prior opportunity with us 3 years later. There's always different types of scenarios that can that salespeople come up in their day to day. And, ultimately the framework might be different. So, like, you might have 5 frameworks for 5 different, triggers that you look out for. It's like, okay, I like calling people who have recently been hired at new companies. That framework's going to look different than the framework, that you potentially have for somebody who's looked at, your product or your service 3 months ago.
Yeah, it's this pattern recognition around common patterns and scenarios. Like, what are the most common situations that I find prospective customers in related to what I might be able to help with, and just making a process that's fairly repeatable. Teddy, in your work, because out of us four, you're probably making the most calls, I would imagine, as the senior SDR. How does this compare to your approach? How do you think about, and maybe just to backtrack, what's your journey been? And like, you're very good on the phones now. I imagine there was
Yeah.
a time that you weren't so good. What
Yeah.
is your progression? Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong too. You could
I
have been like,
I
I just crushed it
I
out of
think
the
I've
gate.
gone through all three, if I'm being honest. So I started in in a call center. Again, very scripted. Couldn't deviate a word, not even a letter
Yeah.
out of the script. I think that's kind of what given me some thick skin. But yeah, I think even at Zoom Info, I think I've gone through all three, right? So when I was new, I needed a script to just even build my knowledge of the product. Beyond that point, once I then kind of built up what it is that we do, who we are interested in, and the benefits we can give, I then built my own script on that. And then obviously, the more senior that I've got, I've then basically used that framework, and I'll change the benefits or the features to it depending on the business I'm talking to, what their title is, and again, depending on the different triggers that I've actually seen from the data that
Yeah.
we've got. So yeah, I think I've kind of gone through all three.
So what does that look like now? If you were to kind of give us a preview of your approach now, maybe walk us through in as much detail as you can. How do you think about the different parts of the call? And just for everyone watching here, what we're going to get into next is like really tactical parts of what should be in a talk track or script. what the framework should look like. And we have some examples we're going to share with you too. But Teddy, let's start with you, man. So
Yeah,
what does that look like if we were to get really kind of tactical here with how you open your call and how you kind of think of
yeah.
everything?
For me, I actually saw this as a debate on LinkedIn yesterday as well, but I will always start with a permission-based opener. I just
Yeah.
think it's good manners. Like if I get a call and someone just talks to me and I don't have a clue who they are or what they're doing, I instantly lose interest. Whereas if I call someone, I ask them for 30 seconds, they've now given me 30 seconds, right? I've just got to do the best I can within it. And then as soon as I've got that, it's more context around it. So it's like, this is why I'm calling. And that could be, I know other people in the business. We've just sold to a competitor. Like any reason as to why we're calling. And then from that point, I'll kind of finish with like a benefit or a feature, which is why I'm calling. And then I'll just kind of leave it very nonchalant and open to them. Like, look, if we can do X, Y, and Z, are you at least open to checking us out?
Yeah.
If that's a no, the way that I view it is, if it's a no already, it's probably not going to be a good fit, even if I somehow get them on a demo. Whereas if it's a yes, I can then start to peel the layers back into Paint, other features, like maybe their tech stack, and then just basically load up the best notes possible for the account exec.
So let us know in the chat. I popped a question in there. Let us know. Are you a fan of permission-based openers? Yes or no? Let us know in the chat. I'm curious. So, Teddy, so your opener, you use a permission-based opener. Can you give us an example again of what that sounds like?
Yeah, I'll just always ask, hi there, it's Teddy at Zoom Info. Very quick one. Have you got 30 seconds?
Yeah, straight to the point. And are you
Yeah.
calling into other EMEA-based companies, or do you call
Yeah.
into the US a bit too? Okay.
I'm quite lucky. I can call anywhere really. Like I can spend the morning calling like Europe, the middle of the day calling the UK, and the evening calling the US.
I was gonna say in the US, you get an advantage with the accent, dude. That's gonna help.
It
Uh,
definitely works.
you got your PBO, your relevance. So what are you looking for in the relevance piece? Is it like something about the company that they're hiring? What do you kind of add there in
Yeah,
that?
so for me, where I found the most success is my background is within recruitment. I was in recruitment for about 7 or 8 years, and I'm very lucky that Zoom Info does very well with recruitment companies. So I try to take as much thinking out of my day as possible by genuinely using Zoom Info. So I'll already have like a load of accounts that I know that are good fits. So I go, these are recruitment companies with over 50 employees that I know are using X like
Yeah.
CRM, if you know what I mean. So at that point, I already know that as I load up like before I even know who I'm talking to. And then by that point, I'll just filter it by director or upwards. And then when I call them, that's all of my thinking done. It's just like, look, this is why I'm calling, this is what we do. Do you want to check it out? And then if it's a yes from that point, it's just again peeling back those layers.
So you find something that's relevant, and then you quickly let them know at the very beginning, like, hey, you might be having this problem, and here's how we help people like you.
Yeah, like you done it at the start of this call, right? Like it's a numbers game.
Yeah.
Like as much as quality is about it, like the role of an SDR is top of funnel, like it's all around quantity, and then I can start to add the quality as I go through.
Got it. So I think where we could kind of transition here is I want to kick this question back your way first, Tim. Just on the Zoom info side. So when you're hearing what Teddy says, he's adapted kind of a framework that's very similar to what you've talked about. He's making it his own. How much of what you do as a leader are you supplying any of the talking points, value prop statements, the typical problems that a prospect that you're reaching out to might have? How much of you as a leader in a leadership team are supplying those talking points to the rep?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's part of being a leader in sales development is, opening, right? A lot of times now Teddy has a lot of experience, in sales and recruitment. But in a lot of scenarios, like you're working with, people who have never done this before, right? Before they've joined your team, they've never made a phone call, they've never been in sales before. Um, so I think like a lot of what we do in, our team meetings and team calls is like talk about, those opportunities or those talking points, the pain points that, we can help solve for businesses. So I guess to circle back to, you know, your question, like Zoom Info SDR specifically, they're getting suggestions, on the pain points and the triggers that they should be calling on in a number of areas. We're fortunate enough to have an enablement team that says, hey, they might provide us data like, hey, these are the top industries that we're performing in. Like, you should focus your time here, and then
Yeah.
tying those pain points back to how we can help those companies. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a lot of what your job is as an SDR manager or SDR leader. Is every single person on your team is a little bit different. So like the permission-based opener might work great for Teddy, but it might not work that well, for another person on the team. And as a leader, like, your job is to figure out, okay, how can I, work with every individual on my team, because no one's the same, and play into what they're really good at. And that's how you're going to build a really high performing team. But then how can you focus these team training calls and enablement sessions on, okay, Teddy's really good at this, Jack's really good at that, Jason's really good at this. If I keep, my enablement sessions talking more about pain points, action handling, triggers, as opposed to scripts, everyone's, abilities are going to be lifted a little bit, as opposed to, running a training session and saying, hey, this is a talk track, and then, half the team walking away and saying, well, I don't really, use that, or I don't call those types of companies, so this isn't relevant for me. And now you've wasted 30 minutes of your,
Wow.
couple of your SDRs day.
Another way that I love that, another way that I kind of am conceptualizing everything that you guys are talking about, is I like to think of like how, what, why. How, the most extreme version of how, is giving someone a script and just saying, you have to say this. An example of what is, hey, in our intro, what we are trying to accomplish is breaking through, getting the prospect's attention, and saying something relevant that's going to perk their ears. And then the why, like really explaining, hey, most cold calls that prospects get from reps, they go straight into pitching their solution. They don't do any kind of permission-based opener. They're immediately selling something. They don't check to see if there's pain, et cetera, et cetera. I think incorporating all of those elements is so important for a framework where you're not just giving a bunch of how-to, you're giving context around the what and the stages, and then also the why behind stuff, so that a rep, when you're looking at it, you can use your own, like, you can be resourceful in thinking about how you could do something that fits into the why and the what, and figuring out your own how, right? I don't know if that made sense or not, but that's kind of how I think about that. Jack, you want to kind of walk us through, I'm curious, you have a couple of different documents that you guys use at Mixmax, but you mind walking us through, I think that high level document is kind of interesting too, that had like broad talking points, maybe before you show the talk track. But how do you think about this from an enablement standpoint of, creating the talk track, providing the talking points, supplying your reps with some of those challenges that we've been talking about? How do you approach this at Mixmax?
Yeah, it's very, Tim and I, we're gonna get along really well, because we're very much on the same page, because I have that same we're such a small team, so a lot of our team trainings, it's not really like going through, hey, here's this script. We take more time going through, here are the common objections we're running into right now. Here's what Joey on my team said that got him into like 30 extra seconds that led to this meeting. We're really talking about patterns that we're seeing and how other reps can get ahead of those patterns, and then start really crafting their own talk tracks in a way, or frameworks. So we always have like or what I've really tried to do, and I'm sure other teams do it differently, is we have a skeleton of whether it's a messaging map or script. But then really, I think team trainings, that's where we're taking more time to go through the patterns of objections we're hitting right now, or getting, and then the successes we're getting, and the losses too. Like, why did Joey not book this call? And then kind of getting everybody's feedback from there. But then separately, what I really, and Tim said this too, which I'm a huge fan of, is separately on one-to-ones, I'm really taking time to craft each of my reps their own talk track or script. Every rep is so different, whatever they want. So I've worked with some veteran, like more senior SDR that still like a script, even though they're not following it. they just like having it. So they at least have something to look as they're calling. Others don't at all. They just want to have a list of everything and common problems. So we kind of have a little bit of everything over here. But from what I want to share is this first one, which is what you brought up first, Jason. Okay, you can see it good. So we have a messaging map. So what we do, since we're such a small team, and for context, we're around 100 employees, we have a messaging map that basically me and the marketing team at Mixmax put together. So this was very much, I would say 70% me, 30% marketing. So it was very much dual effort, where we wanted to present everything from the market challenges we're going through right now, or other teams are going through, the problems we solve, benefit, you name it. Like literally just giving this to the reps so they have a clear background of what's taking place now versus way back when, months ago, years ago. And then as we get more specific, we get into persona-based messaging. So this is really just providing them a framework of how different personas, how we should be speaking specifically to them with our messaging. And this actually can be used. The goal here was for cold calling. So they have this, but it actually is really heavily used for emails as well. So it kind of plays both benefits there. And we kind of go down the track here, literally giving them goals of what VPs of sales are running into, testimonials, a lot of stuff that they don't have or they have to go searching for. It's all here, just so they have in their back pocket for whenever they're making calls, crafting emails. Their messaging is just really going to resonate well with them. The other document I have is obviously a script. So like I mentioned, I really use this more for the teammates that are coming in that are very new. Cold calling may be very new to them. They haven't done it before, or they just are new to Mixmax. They want to have something that they can follow. So we have a really very generic, or I wouldn't say generic, but just a very generic script compared to other senior SDRs on my team. So they have this, but I would say it's not the typical script, because again, I've come from a very script heavy team. It still has, clear areas where I want them to kind of do their own homework. And this is where we're doing this in our one-on-ones. We're having team calls about it, where we're talking about triggers. We're talking about things they should be asking, but it still has like lists of questions they can use for certain instances. But then, as they go down the certain avenues. But anyway, so we kind of have a few different documents that we share and we put together over the course of time.
Can you click back over to that messaging map?
Yeah.
This is something I think that's really resonating with the audience. Tim, Teddy, feel free to chime in as well. I think what sticks out to me a lot about this is when I'm working with a sales team, the very first thing that we'll do, you call it a messaging map, I call it a messaging matrix. The very first thing that we'll do is, hey, the core personas that we're reaching out to, what do they want? I call it their priorities. How do they get the job done right now? Current solutions. So if they're not using our solution, what are they doing to get the job done instead? Problems that creates, and then what are their aspirations? And then that becomes like, once a rep understands their prospect and how your solution kind of fits into what the prospect cares about, it allows you to think on your feet a bit.
100%.
It's where you don't have to be so scripted and prescriptive.
Yeah.
Tim,
I wanted to add one more because like you touched on it and it really resonated with me, because I think that was one thing I struggled as an SDR. Even an AE short stint before I went into management, is I really had a hard time understanding what's the personal benefit for the person I'm calling. Like I understand the value of what our tool can offer, but like beyond that, what more will this do for them in terms of like financial gain or promotional gain? I don't know, like whatever it is. And I think this messaging map really helps the SDR or AE really resonate with that, because then it goes far more than just like feature to feature or more meetings, more revenue gain. It kind of goes further than that, but I like that.
I think another like place or matrix, I really like this, like where they're beneficial. And we just did this at Zoom Info probably 2 or 3 months ago, is a competitor, or not a competitor matrix, an objection matrix, where you have this, and it should be on all the SDR's desks across all of our offices. It's an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and it has the 10 most common objections that we get, and then next to it just has like quick one-liners. So if an SDR is on a phone and they hear an objection, if they're struggling to how to work through that, they have, a response right next to them that's going to at least get them through that objection, hopefully pose another question and continue that conversation through. So it's not so much, a script or a talk track, and it's very similar to this where it's like, hey, this obviously shows personas, but like it would be a specific objection, how to respond to that. And it's just something very quick that you can reference and hopefully start to get through those.
Yeah, I always have, and I've been cold calling for a long time. I always have a page up with just broad talking points on it. Because, sometimes
Yeah.
you get asked a question, you got to think on your feet a bit, and it's just kind of a nice to have something to look at real quick. Like, oh, yeah, I need to make sure to talk about AE self sourcing and how they're, if I'm mix max, how maybe the tools they're using right now are not totally like easy for the AE to use, right? Um,
Yeah.
I think this is super important. This exercise, you can repurpose a lot of this into a talk track. A talk track to me is kind of like a hybrid between a script and a framework. It gives you kind of like the in between. It highlights elements of the framework, but it also gives you very prescriptive guidance around like what to say if you need it. This exercise, you guys, for those of you watching, if your company has not done this, like I said, this is the very first thing I do when I work with a sales team. You can be the person at your company to start like the initiative around creating this, because this is just, as an SDR, I mean, Teddy, like, how long have you been an SDR?
Technically, I think around 7 months. I did take a step up to AE for a short while before coming back, but yeah, I've kind of gone through the whole spectrum of inbound, outbound, and now back in.
I mean, how hard was it in your first month just to learn about, like, when you haven't had a lot of experience selling the thing yet or doing the thing? That's the hardest part, right? It's just like, hey, the people were like I'm talking with, what do they care about?
Yeah, I think that's what I mentioned before at the start, right? Like now I kind of change my framework depending on the business I'm talking to, the title I'm talking to, and what they're actually going to care about. Whereas yeah, having that at the start would have been gold.
Yeah. I'm gonna share one more. I don't know if Jack, people are asking if you can share that as a template. I don't know if Jack's able to do that. I something that I can share with you guys if Jack is not able to. Um, but let me share my my screen here. I have kind of a different take, I think, that's kind of a hybrid, like I said, between of what you two guys are doing. So I have a couple of different formats that I typically create it with. So this is an example of a messaging matrix. So this is a customer that I worked with that sold into clinical operations. So they basically sold a solution that if I sell a medical device, I like to run studies that prove that the medical device actually helps you reduce your risk of cancer or your cholesterol or whatever, right? So what we do first is, hey, for this clinical ops persona, what do they care about? What are their priorities? How do they get the job done? What problems do they have? What are their aspirations? And then like quick value prop statements. And then basically we take this and then we repurpose it into a talk track. So basically the way that I kind of provide guidance around the talk track is use your own opener. If you like to use a permission-based opener, use it. But these talking points, so Tim, you mentioned like the top 2 challenges. This is my version of that. It's, hey, let's supply the rep with the 2 talking points so that when I call, I say, hey, Tim, generally when I'm speaking to clinical ops professionals like yourself, they're really in one of 2 spots. One is around startup timelines. So they have a trial coming up and they want to recruit people for that trial and start as quickly as possible. And 2 is more about patient journey and retention. So when you get patients into the study, just making sure that they don't drop out and you don't have to move back. Startup timelines, which of those areas is a bigger focus for you right now? Or what, if anything, resonates with you? Or are you having either or 2 of these challenges right now? Some variation of that. And then in the middle, what I like to do is, you guys mentioned finding pain, just supplying the problems for the rep. Like, here's the problem, dude, is that it takes 12 to 16 weeks. It takes way too long. We can do it in, 4 to 6 weeks. So just some sample questions that a rep can ask around those problems. Another version of this too, and we were talking frameworks before. I meant to actually show this first. I like to really kind of keep it high level with the framework around like, hey, in our intro, we have these pieces. In our hook, we have these pieces where I want to find the current solution and problem and really focus the conversation, and then my close. And there's kind of a different version of this here I have around a talk track where there's different kind of openers and stuff that people can use. Your talking points here, current solutions, problems listed out, just something that a rep can kind of scroll through really easy if they need it. In terms of, because someone was asking about a reverse pitch, the reverse pitch is, instead of, you guys are big about this at Zoom Info, you guys call it customer voice. It's just something I picked up on from you guys a lot. I don't know if it's like you guys specifically talk about it a lot, or if a lot of the US based folks do. This concept of, instead of talking about what we do, I'm going to talk about what we hear. So instead of saying, we provide sales training for SDR teams looking to set more meetings, it's, I speak with a lot of SDR leaders, and the number one thing that they're focused on right now is, hey, we're setting meetings, but our leadership is being really critical of the quality of those meetings and making sure they're moving into qualified pipeline. How does that resonate with you? So I've talked about what I do through the lens of the customer that way. Okay. So we'll send some of these out. Before Tim and Teddy, you two take off, any final thoughts from you two on talk tracks, the importance of creating them, guidelines for creating them, etc.?
I would say, if I had advice to anybody on the webinar, like your talk track, it's always evolving. It's always getting better, and you have to continue to put thought into how you can make it better. Like if you continue to run into the same dead ends, like think about not how you're handling that dead end, how you're avoiding the dead end on the call. How can you take control of the conversation so that you don't get to this point where you keep falling or keep like not converting on that. So whether you're using a talk track, a script, I think you want to get to a point in your career where you don't have to rely on a piece of paper. You just want to have a conversation, listen to your prospects. You'll sound less salesy. You'll probably have more genuine conversations, and those, deals and opportunities will progress further, because it's not about what you're selling. It's about how you can help this person. And, at the end of the day, you can be the best salesperson in the world, but if you come across from with a tone that, you're here to help them and not necessarily to sell them something, you're always going to have more success, whether you're using a script, whether you're using a framework. There's so many ways to do this job. Every single person is going to be different. Just because something works for Jack doesn't mean it will work for Teddy. Just because something works for Teddy doesn't mean it's going to work for Jason. And you have to figure out what works best for you and where can you have success. But take a little bit of everybody on your team or everyone that you've worked with externally, and take a little piece of everyone's puzzle and make it your own. And that's how you're going to be a great SDR, a great cold caller.
I have to agree with a large part of that. I think the biggest thing that Tim done for me was when I joined, he gave me a list of like good fit accounts that are working for us.
Mhm.
Once I then kind of had a deep dive into what was actually working and the solution that we solved, it then was around not just what I'm saying, it was how I was saying it. And I think that is why, like with a permission-based opener, like they know they're getting sold to. If they're giving me 30 seconds, then if I'm coming across more consultative and not too salesy, generally I'll get their respect a little bit sooner than it was just a typical kind of far away.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you, fellas. Tim, Teddy. We'll
Pleasure.
see ya.
Speak
Thanks
to
for
you
having
soon.
us.
Thank you, guys.
So we're gonna get the next part of PipeGen Live started. So we're gonna do the one-on-one. So Jack, what I thought would be kind of fun here, if you're down, is I think it'd be good to just do some Q&A with people. I think a lot of people have questions about the talk track and want to get more in detail.
Yeah, a lot of it. The questions are really good. So yeah, let's get into it.
So what would really help us, you guys, we'll try to go through the chat as best as we can. If you could use the Q&A button at the bottom of Zoom, if you have a question specifically related to talk tracks, the messaging map that Jack showed, cold calling in general, drop them into the Q&A, and I'd love to get into it. So someone anonymous asked, I just thought this was a great question. Would you create a messaging matrix or map for each product your org sells, or a general one, and the value prop would be based on pain points? And the question there, I think behind the question is, do you take a product and then create messaging around the product, or do you start with a persona? and then create messaging around the persona.
Dang, this is a really good one. Okay, so wow, I think honestly you can go either way here, but for context for Mixmax, we always have started from persona, because then the product we sell, the conversation is totally different. The functions that matter to them may not even matter to the next persona, or even functions don't matter. It's more like bird's eye view value that they who knows. So I actually, for us personally, we start persona and then we get into the different functions or value that comes from there related to that persona. And that's always been a really, I think I'm a bigger fan of that instead of starting with features and functions, just because when we've tried seeing, how this one area of our product can be valuable to everybody or a different persona, but it's a lot easier for us to just map it out, messaging map that we went through. It's a lot easier when we start with the persona and then going through that individual and how every product we have within or the solution really resonates with them and adds value to their job or function. But I don't know, I'm curious on your part, Jason, what do you think?
I'm very pro persona first, and then align what the product helps with to the problems that that persona experiences. I think the number one mistake I see companies make, and dude, it gets really complicated when you sell multiple products. And when you sell multiple products into different personas in different parts of the org, it gets very complicated. The worst thing you can do is start with the product and the problems it solves and just start going out to everyone that you think it might apply to, because your personas, the people you're reaching out to, the language, the universal language between you and prospect is not your product. It's the problems they have and their goals. That's the universal language between you two. That's a language you both should understand. They don't know about your product, and if I'm being frank, they probably don't give a shit about your product either.
Yes.
So you have to align it with their day-to-day. I'm very big on each persona you reach out to, you should be doing that messaging matrix exercise. Priorities, current solutions, problems, desired outcomes. So as we're doing questions, you guys, I turned on something to where you guys could upvote your favorite questions in there. We're not going to probably be able to get to all of them. So if you guys want to upvote the questions that are most popular, go ahead and do that. Dan Topping asks, you've jumped right past the gatekeeper and straight to the prospect. Any tips on how to get past the gatekeeper? They're often more difficult to get past than talking to the prospect themselves. Gatekeepers, Jack. Gotta love them.
You gotta love them.
Like, how do you think about a gatekeeper? Might be kind of maybe a good place to start, and then how do you generally converse with them?
Yeah, so before Mixmax, we got a ton of gatekeepers. At Mixmax, we really don't have this just because we are calling directly. We're very fortunate, but if you're in like getting in touch with a gatekeeper, the way I always look at them is treat them just as important. I think that's one thing that I have always been told, and I still tell to my reps if they have it, don't look at them as like, okay, never mind, thanks for the time, and then hang up. See what information you can get from them. See what information, if that person you actually are talking to, the DM or the stakeholder you're trying to get past, and this gatekeeper too, is that actually the right person? I should, see what they know. I think, a lot of times gatekeepers are actually more open to giving you, or at least helping you and telling you no. Or so anyway, I kind of tell my reps that if you ever do get a gatekeeper, do not treat them. And I think in our eyes, for context at Mixmax, not gatekeepers, but we deal with a lot of individual users. And sometimes our reps can look at the individual users that are actually using our product and not like manager, director, VP level. They're like, they're not as important. I can't do much with them. No, get information from them. Any context that you can get that you can take to that manager or director you're trying to get in touch with goes a long way. I also don't think it's very off-putting to ask if they can help you get an intro. Would you mind introducing me over email? If you've gotten context from them, if you built a relationship with them, we've had a lot of success with that, especially at Mixmax. We'll reach out to SDRs if they like our tool, if they're struggling or whatever, our AEs, whatever, and then they will help us get into the right person. And sometimes if you just ask, they'll add you to an email. They'll give you their number directly. Like, yeah, give them a call. Tell them I, rang you, or give. So I think that's how I approach them.
Yeah, there's so much right there. One, the mindset around, hey, this is a human being and don't treat them like garbage, which I don't know, just I feel like has to be said because a lot of people go in and they, okay, this is not the VP, this is someone that's their assistant, and they treat them like an inferior human being. But I think the big thing there is, hey, this really simple concept of asking for help and some guidance, and you'd be surprised how willing people are to help if you just ask them.
Mhm.
It's pretty crazy. Um, so I just shared the talk track link in the chat. You guys can make a copy. There might be too many people because we have hundreds of people on here trying to access it at the same time. So maybe save that link if it's not working right now for whatever reason.
Great sign they want it, Jason. They want it.
So let's keep going. Uh, okay. Shashank, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. We hear a lot about the fact that cold calling is dead. What's your
Oh
take on
my
it?
gosh. No. Hell no. Come on. Let's okay. So we can go all day. I'll keep this really short. So I think if anything, cold calling, I think Jason, you said it, but we're on this webinar and there's over what? I think at one point 600, 700 people are, it's obviously not dead because everyone's trying to figure out how to do it better. But I also think too, what I've always told my reps is we've seen it. Emails are hard to get conversions from. They're not impossible, but they are super hard. I've actually seen a lot more success coming from calls than emails ever before. So I think cold calling is definitely not dead. If you're thinking that, or even having a slight thought, it might just be that your process may be off or your talk track script. And I think that's where you definitely should own self-development and meet with your manager, meet with someone on your team that's having success and revive it. Because it's definitely not dead. It's just a matter of you may just be going down a rabbit hole that you need to come out of and change it up a little bit. And I think that's what Tim said before he hopped off is it's always evolving. So if you're not staying on top of it, you could be stuck and you definitely don't want to feel that. So anyway, I'll stop there because I can go on.
I mean, Jack and his team and every client that I work with literally has reps that set dozens and hundreds of meetings per month off of the phone. So the game with cold calling right now is, and people have alluded to this, getting people to pick up the phone is really the hardest part. There's a couple of ways that you can sort of manage this. The pickup rate is typically 5%. Making sure that you're using a tool like Zoom Info to get mobile phone numbers, and in your sequences that have call tasks, only call the people with a cell phone number. You're going to
Yes.
see a big spike in pickup rates just by prioritizing mobile phone numbers. And then look into a solution like Orem too, a dialer where you can have multiple lines dialing out and talk with 5, 6, 7 people in an hour versus one person. I know that you guys just started using Orem,
Can't say
Jack.
enough. Yeah.
It's
Orem's been great. And then I'll also add to it that Jason just touched on sequences, the people you're at, but also the people that are actually engaging with you in your sequences. Who's opening? Who's clicking? I can't tell you how many times I've had one-on-ones with my reps and they don't even, I have to remind them to look through that. Like, yeah, no one's getting back to me over email. I don't know who to call right now. Then we bring up a report of all the engagement they've gotten, and they're like, "Oh, dang, I didn't realize this person. I've been trying to get this person for a couple weeks now. They've opened my email 4 times in the last hour." Look at that. Like, there's a whole lot more there that I think reps just are so lost because there's so many things you're having to tackle. So just keep that as a priority too, beyond your sequences of who's actually engaging.
There's a rep that I worked with at a company in Camden. He landed a meeting through a cold call with the CIO of ESPN.
Whoa.
So your biggest thing right here with cold calling is your mindset around it. If you believe it doesn't work and you kind of just, okay, it's not going to work, and you just like that's your mindset, that limiting belief oftentimes is the biggest thing that you need to tackle. Um, okay. Shashank, hopefully that helps you. John asks, knowing that pickup rates are so low, can you hit voicemail tactics that increase return call rates or return email based rates on the voicemail that you left? So, piece of data from Orem, your pickup rate on subsequent calls. So, the second, third, fourth time that you call someone, they're about 25.8% more likely to pick up the phone if you left a voicemail on the first call. And it could be a voicemail drop. It doesn't even have to be a customized voicemail necessarily. So voicemails, they do work. Jack, how do you think about voicemails and coach around voicemails with your reps?
Yeah, so I'll be the first to say I was not a believer. I mean, I won't say believer, but I didn't think voicemails were very important. Like something I really didn't talk about in trainings with my team besides, leave a voicemail for your first call, things like that. However, I in the last few months, I've had one of my reps, and this is always going to stick with me. He literally booked a meeting just because he left a voicemail for an SDR leader that I thought was unique. He literally said, "Hey, Joey, definitely, I'll take a meeting. You're the only SDR that's actually left me a voicemail in the last month, so let's do it."
Yeah.
So that speaks a lot to where leaving a voicemail can work. I won't promise you it's going to book you a meeting because that's probably a diamond in the rough. But however, I look at voicemails as like you're trying to guide them to what you are doing with them over email or LinkedIn. So I think a lot of my team, they will have like, hey, hey John, giving you a quick call. I just sent you an email a little bit ago. Let me know your thoughts. But if you take a look and it sounds interesting, here's my number. Short, sweet. I won't don't go into the rabbit like, hey, redo this. Here's the value. No one's gonna listen to it, especially if it's over 30 seconds. But I think just pointing them in the direction of where you want them to go, your email most likely, that helps a lot. But I'm with Jason. Do not leave a voicemail because they do. At least a voicemail drop, but because they do help. They at least help your voice be heard, so then the prospect knows you're real.
Humanizes you. Voicemails for me, 100% open rate. I open every single voicemail. That doesn't mean I listen to every single one all the way through, but I open it up to at least look at the transcript. So just remember your voicemails are being transcribed. It's got to be nice and tight. Don't just pitch in the voicemail. Do what Jack recommended there and ask them to look at something that you sent them.
Me too.
There you go, John. So here's a good one. CJ asks, if you have a talk track that seems to be working for some of your team, but not others, how do you diagnose whether the issue is the talk track or with the specific SDR's execution of it? That's a great question that CJ asked.
This is really good. And honestly, this is still something I'm tackling, CJ. I'll be honest, because we are always trying to evolve our talk track, but we know it's not going to be 100% success for every SDR. And AE too, because they are using the same resources we have. So I think that what I normally see is, again, the talk track is there, but I always tell the team, this is not going to book, this won't prove 100% booking. This still, you have to have your own individual voice tied to this. And that's what I always am advising them to do is, even though this is a talk track, you have to practice it. You can't just like make a call, read it verbatim or whatever. Like you actually have to be a master of your own talk track on the way. And that more goes into it. Tone of voice, pausing, not shutting up at certain points and letting the prospect do the talking. So I think there's much more that goes into it, but I think it's a balance, right? I'm constantly thinking like, is this talk track good? Like, actually, is it actually working? Should I change it? But more often than not, this is where you should listen to your calls, listen to it back and find, is it really the talk track or am I just, my tone is off? My opener isn't very good. Nothing's, I think there's a lot more that goes into it where you actually have to listen and really take the time to, listen to your calls.
Totally. I think like chunking up the call into different parts. I like to do this, intro, hook, close. So in the intro, it's for that rep, CJ, are they able to get the prospect to want to engage with them past the first 30 to 45 seconds?
Yep.
So did the permission-based opener work if that's what you're teaching? Did that reverse pitch or the problem statement, did that resonate? So that's one part of the call that you can focus on to see if they're getting. If they are getting past that part, 80% of the time, the hook is what's their ability to engage the prospect and find pain, really is the big thing.
Yeah.
And then the last part, the close, do they ask for the meeting? Do they ask enough times? Does the prospect agree to show up to the meeting? Do they show up? Like chunk up the call. And this is the benefit of using a talk track of some sort, is that you generally want everyone following a similar process, not saying the same exact things, but following a similar process. Just like in sales, we don't start negotiating with a prospect before we've done a demo for them, before we've multi-threaded, before we've done some sort of discovery. Like things need to happen in somewhat of an order.
Yep.
So that's a way that you can kind of diagnose. CJ, we've got time for maybe one or two more. Russ Kelly asked a really good question too. How often do you review the documents as we live in a real-time environment? Although your personas may not change the pain points, what would you say is the reasonable review time as a team for these documents? And maybe the more pointed question there, Jack, is like, how often do you guys review the talking points?
I don't know. To be honest, I don't really know if there is a common threshold that makes the most sense. For us, though, this is always something I'm looking into. So we're a smaller team. I have 3 SDRs right now. We have 4 AEs, and we're always listening to recordings, and we're always kind of taking bit by bit and making changes. But I think from the clear, where do we actually look at our persona-based messaging or messaging maps, scripts? For me, it's every other quarter. So roughly 4 to 6 months. I'm really looking at this and saying, does this still make sense? Is this still the same issues, goals that VPs of sales have, RevOps have, all those. So I think that's where 4 to 6 months is a really good benchmark that you should definitely. I think if you're at over that mark, it's due for at least a pretty like a pretty good review, or at least a deep dive into if it's working. But yeah, that's just my opinion.
Yeah, and if it's not working, it's probably weekly. If your reps aren't getting, probably look at it every single day.
Yeah, if your SDRs are making a crap ton of calls and nothing's happening, look at that ASAP. Like, yeah, you should definitely probably look at that again, or see if something's not resonating, they're not following it. I don't know, but yeah, that is definitely true.
Definitely. Let's tackle one more. Nicholas asked, because I think there might be a lot of people here on this call selling services as well. How does message mapping, building a messaging matrix work with service sales versus product sales? It's exactly the same.
Yeah, I don't think there's much different.
It's exactly the same. I think people, depends on what kind of services you sell, but being that I help customers that sell both professional services and software as my bread and butter, the sales process is definitely different. Like, you're not demoing software, obviously, when you sell a service, but the messaging and the approach is like 80-90% the same.
I agree.
It depends on if you're selling like different kinds of stuff, but the messaging of who am I selling to, what are their priorities, current solutions, problems, desired future state, those talking points, that is the language that you use to talk about your service or your product or your software. It's exactly the same. The approach is going to look exactly the same. Cool. That's all the time we got today, you guys. Great questions. We had a really good, lively crowd today. Jack, thanks for coming and jamming with us. Where can people go connect with you, learn more about Mixmax, all of that good
hit
stuff?
me up on LinkedIn, please. Send me, people have definitely done this way more, as Jason and I have been spitting out these webinars more and more. Please continue it. Send me a DM. Meet with, let's connect, let's do it. And of course, see some questions about Mixmax, let me know. We have a free trial. Go test it out and let me know how I can help there.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Go check out Mixmax, Zoom Info. Go check out Magical, and we'll see you next show. See you in a couple weeks. Later, everyone.